Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that June finally receives the news she has longed for, the chance at forgiveness. For years, she had lived with the gnawing ache of regret, the shadow of choices that had ripped her away from Samantha and Tyrell. Forgiveness seemed like a distant dream, something she barely dared whisper to herself at night. Now, with Naomi's quiet guidance, that dream edged closer to reality. Naomi had been the bridge, gently encouraging June to be softer, more approachable, especially in the presence of the children. Naomi understood that wounds ran deep, but also knew that time and effort could begin to mend even the most jagged scars. When June thought of the possibility of being near Samantha and Tyrell again, her heart fluttered between fear and exhilaration. She was terrified of rejection, of cold stares and accusations. Yet the image of their faces, the sound of their laughter, carried her forward with hope that outweighed dread. The reunion itself unfolded in tentative steps. The air was heavy with uncertainty, each glance a measure of suspicion or longing. Samantha's eyes sparkled with curiosity, Tyrell's with guarded distance. The atmosphere might have crumbled under the weight of unspoken history if not for the steadying presence of Smitty and Martin. They were the quiet anchors, providing enough balance to keep emotions from boiling over. Tyrell, brimming with resentment, clenched his jaw and stiffened his shoulders, but seeing Smitty's calm and Martin's patience, he managed to restrain his fury. His fists itched for release, his voice trembled with unsaid accusations, but for the moment, he held back. When June began to speak, her voice trembled at first, then steadied as she poured out her truth. She confessed the unbearable pain of walking away, how it was not a decision made lightly or without sleepless nights. She explained that sometimes choices cut in impossible directions. That leaving them behind was, in her tortured mind, the only way to protect them from deeper harm. Tears pricked her eyes as she admitted she had lived with that loss every day. Her words struck Tyrell like stones. Anger still surged through him, but beneath it, something softer stirred, a recognition of her pain. He didn't forgive her instantly, no wound that deep could vanish in an hour, but he began to understand that abandonment had not been simple cruelty. Smitty and Martin exchanged glances during her confession, both men processing their own tangled thoughts. They knew the truth of parenting, that mistakes happen, that choices can wound, but that the instinct to protect children, however misguided, always remains at the center. Martin, especially, felt sympathy rise in his chest. He, too, had made choices that alienated people he loved. In June's tears, he saw the reflection of his own guilt. Smitty, ever more restrained, nodded quietly, acknowledging the raw courage it took for June to expose her heart. Samantha, caught in the swirl of adult emotions, radiated joy at the thought of something simple, togetherness. For her, the complexities of betrayal and guilt mattered less than the prospect of having her mother and her family under one roof. She wanted laughter in the kitchen, warmth at the dinner table, the illusion of a complete home. Her youthful optimism softened the room, bringing smiles even through tears. Her wish for unity touched Smitty most profoundly because he knew the cost of that illusion. For Smitty carried a secret. Beneath his calm exterior was a truth he could not share with Samantha and Tyrell, not yet. He was not ready to forgive Martin. The smiles they exchanged in front of the children were masks, carefully placed to shield innocent eyes from the fractures still festering beneath. Smitty had agreed to the charade, a silent pact between him and Martin, because the children's happiness outweighed his bitterness. But inside, resentment remained coiled like a serpent. Martin's betrayal, though smoothed over in words, still burned in his chest. One evening, as Samantha and Tyrell played in the living room, Smitty confronted Martin in hushed tones. "We can't keep lying to them," he said, his jaw tight. "They deserve the truth. They deserve to know this piece where pretending isn't real." Martin's face paled. He knew Smitty was right, but fear gripped him. He begged for more time. He argued that the fragile harmony they had constructed would collapse under the weight of honesty. "Please," Martin whispered, desperation in his voice. "Just a little longer. Let them believe in this family until I can earn it back." Smitty's resolve wavered, And just as he was about to push harder, fate intervened. June appeared unexpectedly, her timing unintentional yet crucial. Her presence shifted the conversation, giving Martin a reprieve from Smitty's ultimatum. The tension eased in appearance, though it merely simmered beneath the surface. Smitty, catching Martin's pleading eyes, relented temporarily. He agreed that, for June's sake, they should project unity, especially as she worked to re-establish her place in the children's lives. The arrangement became official soon after. Martin packed his belongings and moved into the home, settling into the role of co-parent alongside Smitty. For Samantha and Tyrell, it was a dream come true, their family under one roof, laughter echoing in halls that had long carried silence. June felt hope swell in her chest, believing that perhaps her absence could be forgiven, that her return could restore what had been lost. Naomi, watching from the side, felt pride in June's growth but remained wary. She knew how fragile these new bonds were, how easily they could shatter under pressure. As days turned into weeks, the fragile truce took shape. At the dinner table, conversations flowed with cautious warmth. June leaned into her role as a mother, eager to prove her devotion through small gestures, cooking meals, listening to stories, tucking the children in at night. Samantha thrived under the affection, her optimism spreading like sunlight through every corner. Tyrell remained more guarded, but even he began to soften, his anger tempered by the steady presence of Smitty and Martin guiding him toward understanding. Yet beneath the surface, the adults carried the weight of unspoken truths. Martin lived with the gnawing awareness that Smitty's forgiveness was a performance, not reality. He sensed the distance in Smitty's eyes, the forced nature of his smiles. Each day he asked himself the same question: would this charade eventually wear thin, or could he truly win back the trust he had squandered? Smitty, in turn, battled with his conscience. He knew the lie could not last forever. The longer they delayed, the harsher the truth would strike when it finally came out. Still, each time he looked at Samantha's radiant face or heard Tyrell's laughter, he silenced his doubts. Protecting their joy felt worth the cost of his own integrity for now. June, meanwhile, wrestled with her own demons. She wanted to believe that forgiveness had been granted, but she could sense the cracks. She caught glimpses of hesitation in Tyrell's eyes, noticed the subtle exchanges between Smitty and Martin. A voice inside warned her that peace this perfect could not be real. But after years of exile, she clung desperately to what she had been given. She told herself it was enough to be present, enough to be trying. The turning point arrived when Samantha, filled with hope and innocence, asked the question that silenced the room: "Can we always stay like this? All of us together forever?" Her voice rang with purity, a child's dream of permanence. Smitty froze, torn between the truth and the lie. Martin swallowed hard, fear flooding his veins. June looked at both men, her heart pounding. Naomi, watching from a distance, held her breath. The fragile illusion trembled under the weight of that one simple request. For Samantha's dream was both beautiful and dangerous. It forced the adults to confront the fragile scaffolding they had built. It pushed them toward a reckoning they had long delayed. Could they sustain the performance indefinitely, or would the truth come crashing down, threatening to wound the very children they had sought to protect? Martin, determined not to lose everything, resolved that this was his chance. If Smitty could see his sincerity, not in words, but in actions, then perhaps true forgiveness could be earned. Living under one roof was no longer just about appearances for him. It became his mission to prove he deserved his place, to show both Smitty and the children that he could be steady, dependable, trustworthy. Yet the question remained: was Smitty willing to open the door, or would his resentment always linger in the shadows? As days unfolded into nights, the tension coiled tighter, hidden behind smiles, but ready to snap. June's return had brought joy, but also the inescapable need for truth. Naomi sensed it coming like a storm on the horizon, urging June to brace herself. The fragile peace was not built to last, and when it broke, the choice would be clear for all of them: cling to the lie or confront the truth and risk losing the family they had just begun to rebuild. The fragile balance inside the household began to strain as days passed. What had started as a hopeful attempt at unity revealed fault lines that no one could continue ignoring. Samantha's dream of a permanent, happy family hung over them like a sacred vow, but beneath the surface, the adults wrestled with truths too heavy to bury forever. Smitty, carrying the weight of his unresolved resentment, found it harder each day to play the role of forgiving partner. Martin, determined to prove his worth, struggled against the constant reminder that forgiveness had not yet been earned. And June, whose return had sparked this fragile reconciliation, began to realize that her place in the children's lives was only secure if the adults could find a way to settle their own fractures. Tyrell remained the most unpredictable presence. He had begun to thaw toward June, but the wounds of her absence still lingered. Some nights he clung to her, desperate for her affection. Other nights, anger flared, and he reminded her of the years she had missed, the milestones she had abandoned. June absorbed it all, her heart breaking a little more with each reminder. She knew her road to redemption would not be easy, but she had not expected it to be so unsteady, swinging between warmth and rejection with every passing day. Naomi continued to act as a quiet guardian, watching from the edges, offering encouragement when needed, but never imposing. She understood better than anyone that healing required patience. She urged June to remain consistent, to show through actions rather than promises that she was here to stay. June clung to this advice, though doubt gnawed at her every time Tyrell pulled away or Smitty's eyes flashed with unspoken bitterness. Martin threw himself into daily life with the children, taking on responsibilities, cooking meals, and attending to homework. His efforts were genuine, but Smitty could not ignore the history that still loomed between them. Their unspoken pact remained intact for the children's sake, yet Smitty often found himself questioning the cost of this deception. He wondered if protecting Samantha and Tyrell from the truth was actually hurting them in the long run. At night, when the children slept, he replayed Martin's pleas for more time, wondering whether he was a fool for agreeing. The first real crack appeared during a family dinner. The atmosphere had been cheerful, Samantha reciting lines from her school play, Tyrell joking about a game he had won, but then Martin, in a moment of unguarded honesty, made a comment about second chances. It was meant to be light, a reflection on mistakes and redemption, but Smitty caught the deeper implication. His fork froze halfway to his mouth, his eyes narrowing. The children laughed, oblivious, but June felt the tension ripple across the table. Later, when they were alone, Smitty confronted Martin again, accusing him of using veiled words to test the boundaries of their fragile truce. Martin denied it, swearing he had meant nothing by it, but Smitty's trust eroded further. Meanwhile, Samantha's hope only grew stronger. She began planning little family activities, picnics in the park, movie nights, game tournaments. To her, every laugh was proof that they were becoming whole again. She spoke constantly of forever, of the certainty that nothing would break them apart this time. Her innocence was both beautiful and heartbreaking, for the adults knew how precarious the arrangement truly was. Smitty found himself smiling through the pain, unwilling to crush her dream, even as he wondered how long he could continue this act. Tyrell, though less vocal, observed everything. He noticed the tightness in Smitty's jaw, the way Martin sometimes avoided eye contact, the flicker of sadness in June's smile. Unlike Samantha, he did not blindly accept appearances. He had grown sharper from his years of disappointment, more attuned to the things people tried to hide. He began to suspect that the harmony he saw was only a performance. The realization brewed quietly in him, a storm waiting to break. As weeks turned to months, the pressure intensified. June worked tirelessly to bond with the children, making up for lost time with endless patience. She read to them at night, showed up at their school events, cooked their favorite meals. Samantha adored her, clinging to her as though afraid she might vanish again. Tyrell allowed himself to soften bit by bit, though his trust was conditional, fragile. But even as June won ground with her children, she sensed that the true battle lay not with them, but with the men who stood between her and stability. One evening, Smitty reached his breaking point. After another tense exchange with Martin, he retreated to the porch, staring out into the night. Naomi joined him, sensing his turmoil. He confessed the truth to her, that he had never truly forgiven Martin, that the smiles were masks, that he feared what would happen when the truth surfaced. Naomi listened, then asked the question that pierced him. Are you protecting the children, or are you protecting yourself from admitting you can't forgive? The words sank into him like stones. He had never considered that his silence might be cowardice rather than sacrifice. Martin, too, wrestled with his own guilt. He wanted to believe he was rebuilding, but the constant shadow of Smitty's doubt crushed him. He began to wonder if forgiveness was even possible, or if he was doomed to forever play the role of tolerated intruder. Still, he pressed on, determined to prove himself through consistency. He helped Samantha rehearse for her play, cheered Tyrell at his games, carried the daily weight of chores without complaint. Yet no matter how hard he tried, he could not escape the flicker of mistrust in Smitty's eyes. The tipping point came when Tyrell, sharp-eyed and unafraid, confronted the adults directly. He had overheard fragments of an argument between Smitty and Martin late at night, their voices low but urgent. His suspicions confirmed, he demanded answers. "Why are you pretending?" he asked, his voice shaking with anger. "Do you think we can't tell? Do you think we're too young to see the truth?" The question shattered the silence they had all clung to. Samantha burst into tears, begging them to deny it, to insist that everything was fine. June tried to soothe her, but the damage was done. The lie had been exposed, and there was no retreat. Smitty, his face pale, admitted the truth at last. He told the children that he and Martin had agreed to act like everything was healed to protect them, but that forgiveness was not something that could be forced. His voice cracked as he explained that love and trust take time, that pretending was not the same as being whole. Samantha sobbed, accusing them of ruining everything. Tyrell, though hurt, nodded grimly. He had known all along, and part of him felt vindicated. The fallout was painful. Samantha withdrew into herself, her bright optimism dimmed by betrayal. She struggled to understand why the people she loved most could not simply let go of the past. Tyrell grew more distant, convinced that honesty would always be sacrificed for comfort. June felt her progress unravel, her heart aching as she realized that her return had not healed the family, but had instead forced open wounds that were never truly closed. And yet, within the chaos, something new began to take shape. For the first time, the masks were gone. The truth, raw and uncomfortable, lay bare between them. It hurt, but it was real. Naomi reminded them all that families are not built on perfection, but on the willingness to face imperfection together. She urged Smitty and Martin to stop performing and start rebuilding, brick by brick, even if it meant years of slow, painstaking work. June, humbled, accepted that forgiveness was not hers to demand. She resolved to remain steady, to prove through constancy that she would never abandon Samantha and Tyrell again. She knew she could not erase the past, but she could show them that the future would be different. In time, Samantha's tears gave way to cautious hope again, though she no longer spoke of forever with the same innocence. Tyrell, though skeptical, began to respect the honesty that had finally emerged. Smitty and Martin, though still divided, found a strange relief in no longer pretending. Their journey toward forgiveness would be long, uncertain, but it would be authentic. The house, once filled with the illusion of perfection, now echoed with something else, truth. It was messy, painful, and unfinished, but it was also real. And in that reality, fragile though it was, lay the first true chance of becoming a family, not by pretending to be whole, but by learning to live with their brokenness and still choosing each other anyway. In the months that followed the eruption of truth, the household felt heavier yet strangely freer. The silence that once hung between Smitty and Martin had been shattered, and though the aftermath was messy, it allowed something genuine to take root. They no longer spoke through veiled smiles or careful avoidance. Every word now carried honesty, sometimes sharp and painful, sometimes tentative and soft. Samantha and Tyrell, though shaken, began to sense the difference between pretense and sincerity. For the first time, they were living in reality, not in a fragile play held together by fear. June's role became clearer than ever. She could not undo the years she had been gone, but she could make herself indispensable in the present. She established new traditions with the children: Saturday breakfasts where everyone cooked together, nightly rituals of sharing one good thing and one hard thing about their day. These small acts of stability reassured Samantha and Tyrell that, even when the adults faltered, she would remain. Naomi often watched quietly, pride filling her chest as she saw June transform from a shadow of regret into a woman rooted in responsibility. Smitty struggled most with the idea of forgiveness. He wanted to move forward, but part of him clung to the betrayal like a shield. Late at night, he replayed every wrong, every broken promise, every piece of trust that had been shattered. But Naomi's words haunted him still. Was he protecting the children or protecting himself? The more he examined that question, the more he realized that clinging to pain did not preserve him. It only kept him trapped. Slowly, he began to let small moments of grace slip through. He still couldn't say the word forgiven, but sometimes his actions spoke it anyway, in the way he handed Martin a cup of coffee without resentment, or joined him on a late-night grocery run without hostility. Martin noticed these changes, however subtle, and took them as signs that progress was possible. He stopped begging for immediate absolution and instead dedicated himself to consistency. He showed up every day with quiet persistence, knowing that the only way forward was to earn trust, not demand it. Samantha started leaning on him more, asking for help with her projects, while Tyrell, though still cautious, sought his advice when Smitty wasn't available. Each of these small connections reminded Martin that redemption was not a single act, but a series of choices. The children carried their own scars. Samantha, once blinded by innocence, learned to temper her optimism with patience. She still dreamed of family unity, but she no longer begged for it as if wishing could make it real. Instead, she chose to embrace the love available in the moment. Tyrell, hardened by his suspicions, began to open up after seeing that honesty, however painful, was finally the rule of the household. He stopped expecting lies and started demanding dialogue, refusing to let silence swallow his questions again. This strength gave him a maturity beyond his years, though it also reminded the adults how much their conflict had shaped him. The turning point toward a new chapter came during Samantha's school play. All 4 adults attended, sitting together despite their tension. Samantha's joy on stage was undeniable, her voice clear, her performance brimming with confidence. In the audience, Tyrell watched with pride, June's hands squeezed tightly around his, while Smitty and Martin sat side by side, a quiet truce binding them. When the curtain closed, Samantha's eyes lit up at the sight of them all together. For once, the unity was not a lie, it was fragile but real. They were imperfect, but they were present, and that mattered more than any illusion of perfection. Afterward, in the crowded school hallway, a small but significant moment occurred. Smitty extended his hand to Martin, not a full embrace, not a declaration of forgiveness, but a gesture of acknowledgement. Martin accepted without hesitation, his eyes glistening. Naomi, standing nearby, caught June's gaze, and they both knew this was the kind of progress that could not be forced, only earned through time and shared experience. From then on, the family no longer tried to label themselves as fixed or broken. They accepted that they were both. Samantha and Tyrell grew into this new understanding, learning that love could exist even when people failed each other, and that forgiveness was not about forgetting, but about choosing to move forward despite the pain. June continued to anchor them with steady devotion, never running when challenges arose. She still wrestled with guilt, but it no longer defined her. Instead, it motivated her to keep showing up. Naomi remained the quiet pillar, stepping in when tempers flared, reminding them all that healing was a process, not a destination. Smitty and Martin's journey remained the most complex. Some days they fought, reopening old wounds. Other days they found themselves laughing unexpectedly over shared memories or inside jokes. Neither claimed victory over the past, but both understood that their commitment to the children and, in a way, to each other, was stronger than their resentment. Slowly, the bond between them shifted from one of forced tolerance to one of hard-earned respect. Years later, when Samantha looked back on her childhood, she would not remember a perfect home. She would remember the nights of tears, yes, but also the mornings of laughter, the resilience of a family that refused to collapse even under the weight of its fractures. Tyrell would carry the lessons of truth and resilience into his own life, never afraid to confront the hard realities, but also never closing himself off to love. And for the adults, the ending was not a grand reconciliation, but something subtler and perhaps more powerful. They did not erase the past, but they learned to live with it, weaving it into the fabric of their future instead of pretending it never existed. Their love for the children bound them tighter than their conflicts could break them. The final scene was not one of triumph, but of quiet persistence. The family gathered around a table, sharing stories, laughter mingling with the occasional sharp word, but always circling back to the choice to remain together. Imperfect, fractured, yet enduring, they discovered that family was not about never breaking. It was about always finding a way to mend, again and again. And in that ongoing act of mending lay the true ending of their story. Not a happily ever after, but a living, breathing commitment to keep walking forward, hand in hand, even when the road was uncertain.